few weeks ago, over 100,000 people joined the racist United Kingdom demo in central London, led by Tommy Robinson. It was probably the largest far-right demonstration ever organised in Britain. The Labour government was appalled, and so was the British left. The SWP described it as a wake-up call, adding, "Nazi Tommy Robinson's breakthrough march shows the scale of the fascist threat." Appeals to create your party are motivated by the need to defeat the far right and to keep Reform UK from forming the next government. The Labour government is accused of pandering to reform with its hostile attacks on so-called illegal migrants. Yet, in treating Robinson and Farage as the principal source of racism today, the left conveniently ignores the fact that imperialism underpins racism and that the British state necessarily reproduces racism in Britain in order to protect the interests of the ruling class. Imperialism divides the world between a handful of rich, oppressor nations and poor, underdeveloped nations. Racism in the imperialist countries is the domestic expression of their parasitic, exploitative relationship with these underdeveloped nations. British capital, directed by a handful of British banks and monopolies, subjects the oppressed masses of these countries to brutal exploitation, and the British state facilitates this looting and plunder. The resulting conditions of war, poverty, and environmental destruction forces workers to move to the imperialist countries in search of work or refuge. The British state ensures that this flow of people is carefully tailored to suit the needs of British capitalism. This is the purpose of immigration controls in Britain, not to stop migration, but to ensure that it forms a source of readily available labour power. This requires careful calibration, and since 1945, the British state has implemented some 19 major immigration acts, 11 under the Conservatives and 8 under Labour governments. Each one was introduced to tweak immigration controls to suit the specific needs of British capitalism at a given point in time. From Labour's British Nationality Act of 1948 to draw on workers from Britain's colonies for post-war reconstruction, to the string of vicious acts in the 1960s to the 1980s to curtail immigration when British capitalism re-entered conditions of crisis and industrial stagnation. We have therefore always understood immigration controls in an imperialist country like Britain to be necessarily racist. However, those who flee and arrive in Britain by so-called illegal means, asylum seekers in general, and now especially those arriving in small boats, they cannot be controlled. The British state therefore meets them with extreme hostility, criminalising and deporting them, and creating intolerable conditions to deter them and prevent them arriving. But this is impossible. Imperialism structurally creates the conditions that they are escaping from. And as the crisis intensifies, so too does the brutal exploitation of these countries, forcing even more people to flee. Whilst the hostile environment was implemented by the 2010 to 24 Conservative governments, it grew out of the vicious policies of the preceding Blair-Brown Labour governments directed against the growing number of asylum seekers and refugees. It was Labour that coined the term. In 2007, Labour MP Liam Byrne described Labour's plans as trying to create a much more hostile environment in this country if you are here illegally. The Conservatives' 2023 Illegal Migration Act laid out the legal basis for maximum hostility to any undesirable immigration to Britain by deeming anyone who arrives outside the legal routes as an illegal migrant, to be criminalised and deported as soon as possible. Of course, for those who are unable to go through Britain's vicious and costly visa and immigration system, there are no legal routes. Racism is inseparable from imperialism. Any political party which seeks to run the British state must demonstrate to the ruling class that it will maintain a sufficiently brutal programme to deal with the flow of unwanted migration. The differences between Labour, Reform and the rump of the Conservative Party on managing migration merely reflect different strategies for dealing with the problem. However it is expressed, whether it's Reform's stop the boats or Labour's smash the gangs, the British ruling class is absolutely clear on the need to stop unwanted migration. British capitalism in crisis and stagnation has no use for them. It cannot possibly employ them, and even the meagre state expenditure needed to keep them destitute and above starvation is ultimately a fetter on capital accumulation. As such, there is no fundamental difference between Labour and Reform. Reform simply proposes a more aggressive, nakedly aggressive programme for defending British capitalism. We must be clear, however, that Labour is in government, whilst Reform can only offer rhetoric. Labour boasts of some 35,000 deportations since coming into government, around one every 19 minutes. It is pledging to move asylum seekers out of hotels and back into prison camps situated in ex-military or industrial sites, and it is further expanding Britain's immigration detention infrastructure. It is suspending the right for successful asylum seekers to bring their families across and threatening overseas students with increased deportations. Labour is constantly seeking ways to make the process of applying for refugee status more punitive and promising that those who arrive by so-called illegal means will never achieve citizen status. Heralding a further attack on the poorest, Labour is demanding that migrants must have English to an A-level standard. This rules out the tens of thousands of migrants who keep the social care system going on pitiful wages and appalling conditions. It is a direct attack on the working class as a whole. Reform is backed by the sections of the British ruling class which seek an even closer alliance with US imperialism and a complete break from the European imperialist bloc. These sections are represented by Farage, who was leader of UKIP and a figurehead of the Brexit referendum where their interests prevailed. We see this expressed in Farage's relationship with Donald Trump, or in US billionaire Elon Musk addressing the racist Tommy Robinson rally in London via video link. As communists, we recognise that Britain's imperialist character shapes all the political questions facing the working class. This view is completely at odds to those of the opportunist left, which separate racism from the needs of the British imperialist state. The official anti-racist movement, led by Stand Up to Racism, attempts to divert attention away from the racist nature of the Labour government. It calls for unity against the racist, which in practice means unity with the Labour Party, whose politicians and representatives regularly speak on Stand Up to Racism platforms. Stand Up to Racism has organised countless demonstrations against Reform, against the racists on the streets, against Trump, and even against the AfD outside the German embassy. But it has not organised a single serious demonstration against Labour and its migration policy since it formed a government in July 2024. Quite the opposite. In May 2025, in the local elections, Stand Up Racism urges to, quote, go door to door where Reform candidates are standing to mobilise the vote against them, effectively calling for anti-racists to canvass for the racist Labour Party. The left peddles the notion that Labour's racism is simply a concession to Reform and the far right. Following these local elections, Socialist Worker ran the headline, Labour turns to the right as Reform UK wins big in elections. Labour has not turned to the right. It has always been a racist imperialist party, and in government it has to drive forward the racist interests of the ruling class. Labour does seek support from a large, reactionary and openly racist layers of the electorate. These layers are not, however, Nazis as if they are some foreign import. They are people who have a stake in the system courtesy of British imperialism. They include sections of the petty bourgeoisie, middle class and working class afforded petty privileges by British imperialism, such as landlords, shopkeepers, small business owners, estate agents, solicitors, former supporters of the Tory party. Their concerns are driven by fear of impoverishment, imagining that asylum seekers will destroy their conditions of life, their stake in the system. But the British left forgoes any such class analysis. For them, it's the existence of these reactionary layers that drives the racism of Labour and the British state, and not the other way around. Stand Up to Racism is so determined to prevent the official anti-racist movement from challenging the British state that it rejects that Zionism is a racist ideology, so as to maintain an alliance with the trade unions which bankroll it, and with the pro-Zionist Labour Party. For years, Stand Up to Racism allowed Zionists to join its annual anti-racism demonstration in Glasgow only in 2024 after the start of the genocide, making gestures to oppose them. The SWP says, Stand Up to Racism is a united front that seeks to build the maximum possible unity and numbers on the streets to confront the threat of fascism. So it doesn't demand that everyone signs up to anti-Zionism as a prerequisite for mobilising against fascism and the far right here. So standing up to racism is reduced to opposing fascism, and so the question of Zionism can be avoided and the Palestinian people abandoned. So how does it explain Tommy Robinson's ongoing visit to Israel on invitation of Zionist government ministers? In an article titled, "What is the relationship between Zionism and the far right?" Socialist Worker relegates it to a, quote, convergence of interests between Robinson and Israeli far-right ministers. It then claims that Tommy Robinson's anti-Semitism renders his support for the Israeli state as conditional, as if Zionism and anti-Semitism are somehow incompatible. In fact, they are connected. And the article ends, "It would be a mistake to conclude that support for Israel or Zionism is the starting point or an essential feature of a fascist movement in Britain. Pro-Zionism would absolutely be an essential feature of a fascist movement because British imperialism needs its Zionist ally. To suggest otherwise is to separate fascism from imperialism. SWP and Stand Up to Racism reduce fascism to some alien ideology which has no class roots and which is entirely independent of the class struggle and the needs of the imperialist state. They are conceding ground to the fusion of pro-Zionist sentiment with street racism which is already underway and is seen in the rising hostility to the Palestine movements on the streets from these racists. The ruling class, through its media and through its Labour government, is seeking to embolden the most reactionary and racist sections of the working class and petty bourgeoisie into a physical defence of their petty privileges, or in other words, into acting as unofficial and unpaid auxiliaries of the state. We see this in the racist demos outside asylum seeker hotels up and down the country, where racists on the streets are demanding an even more brutal programme against asylum seekers. And last summer, these forces took matters into their own hands in the racist riots in Rotherham, attempting to burn down one of these hotels. The problem for the ruling class lies in the possibility that unleashing these forces has the potential to conjure up resistance, especially amongst Black and Asian workers. We saw this possibility in the mobilisations in Birmingham, Bolton and Blackburn last summer, led by Asian youth flying Palestine flags and confronting the racists. Next Saturday, UKIP will attempt to march in Whitechapel. Until now, such demonstrations have taken place in central London because the racists know that if they go into areas of London where people actually live and where there is a strong concentration of Black and Asian workers, they will encounter fierce opposition. A counter-demo has been called by Nijo Manoush, led by local Bengali and Bangladeshi community. to confront the racists. FRFI will be there with them. Stand Up to Racism has since called a separate counter-demo with the apparent aim of marching people away from the racists, leaving the local Black and Asian community isolated in the face of racist violence from the police and the racists on the streets. This is the bankruptcy of the official anti-racist movement, seeking to avoid any confrontation either with the racists or the state. So what does an anti-racist movement against the British state mean in practice? It means opposition to Britain's racist immigration controls by building resistance to all of its manifestations. It means protesting outside the immigration detention centres and demanding their closure, and uniting with the migrants resisting from inside, as we have seen in recent years. It means defence against racist police harassment and criminalisation. It means fighting back against immigration raids and deportations. We've seen this in the United States, where thousands have taken to the streets opposing ICE and then the US military facing tear gas, pepper spray and rubber bullets. The view of fight racism, fight imperialism remains what it has been for years. It is Black and Asian workers, those subject daily to the racism of the British state, who will form a genuine anti-racist movement. One which is politically capable and willing to fight against the British state, not just the racist auxiliaries on the streets which it creates. Those who will be part of a movement against the racist British state include asylum seekers in hotels or detention centres, or those forced to live destitute in slum conditions whose daily existence proves the racism of the British state. FRFI has a tradition of working alongside migrants and asylum seekers in campaigns against the British state. We do not see them as objects of charity, but as people who will stand up for their interests because they have no choice but to do so.